Philosophicat, welcome to the Gauntlet. Are you ready?
As ready as I'll ever be.
Okay, round one: music, economics, or cosmology.
Well, let's start with music.
Great. Okay, here's your three assertions. Music is the only universal language. Choosing music, I guess music to listen to maybe or play, is an ethical matter. Or auto-tune is a problem. You can pick any of these three and then argue for or against.
Auto-tune is
What are
a
your
problem
thoughts?
Immediately has me thinking of the live-action Beauty and the Beast movie that was auto-tuned
Oh,
into
with
oblivion.
with Emma Watson, right?
Yes, because she's not a singer.
No.
She tried, but she's not a singer. Let's just say that. They would have been better off dubbing her with
Yeah.
somebody else. Yeah, I mean, auto-tune has it has its uses. Like any other tool, fine when used
Uh-huh.
appropriately in small doses, but the amount that it's probably used in popular music these days, probably a little bit excessive.
Did you want to pick that as your choice?
Well, let's roll with that for now. Do I get to pick other
Sure.
ones later?
Yeah. It's just for the first round, so
All right.
in 10 minutes you'll get another choice.
Okay.
Yeah, so autotune. T-Pain famously, his whole brand was around over autotuning thing, right? Do you think there's a place for it as a tool?
I think there's a place for a lot of technology as a tool. Um, you know, when you're recording a song, like if you're singing, the odds of you getting a perfect take for the entire song the whole way through, like oftentimes that's not going to happen. And maybe sometimes there's consistently like one note that's just always sounding a little bit sour, and you just need to tweak it a little bit just to bring the song up to its full potential. I don't have a problem with that. I think it's a problem when you have somebody who just legitimately cannot sing, and you're basically trying to use technology to turn them into a singer.
Yeah.
It always sounds, you can always tell, it always sounds robotic. There's a lot of those like electronic artifacts left in the recording.
Yeah,
What do
was
you
it Cher who came out with a song where it was really obviously auto-tuned? I feel like it was Cher. Believe? That was the Do You Believe? And it sounds really
Oh,
weird and
God.
robotic. I
Yeah.
think that's a slightly different question in some ways. Is can auto-tune be used in a really prominent way that isn't pretending to be the singer's actual voice? And then there's can you use auto-tune in a subtle way just to fix up a performance? And then there's, what if you use auto-tune to take somebody from a 1 out of 10 to a sort of 5 out of 10, so it's still unlistenable, but now has a weird hybrid robot quality as well.
I think there are types of music where you could certainly choose to use it as an artistic choice because that is the sound that you're going for, like maybe with some types of electronic music or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time like thinking of anything that comes to mind that I could point to as like a great example of doing that. But like hypothetically speaking, I think you could choose to use it because you're like, oh, I actually want this to have a robotic sound because for whatever reason, that's what I'm trying to convey. Just like you might make a stylistic choice to use like Cookie Monster growls instead of clean vocals, right? Like sometimes
Yeah,
it's just a
right.
certain sound that you're going for, and the sound is not even necessarily meant to be a pretty sound.
Yeah. So you have done quite a lot of high quality recording singing, right? You've had tracks where you've sung on them and it's been produced to a high quality. Do you know whether you had auto-tune applied on your vocals? I don't know. Is that a rude question
No,
to
we
ask a
don't.
vocalist?
We don't use. Oh no, it's not a rude. I don't. Well, I don't consider it a rude question at all. And thank you for the compliment about the quality of the recordings. We do most of our production ourselves. So to my knowledge, nobody's ever put auto tune on my voice. I've usually been part of that process. I mean, I suppose I might feel a little offended if somebody were to be like, "Oh, maybe we should auto tune this." I think my natural inclination would be like, "Let me just try to sing it again."
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Um, but I'm also like I'm also a trained vocalist, so
Right.
there's no reason. I'm unlike Emma Watson, who maybe she never had a singing lesson before in her entire life before being cast in that role. Uh, After close to 2 decades, well, probably more than 2 decades of singing now, I'm kind of dating myself, but I should probably be able to hit those notes on my own. And if I can't, I might want to go speak to some of my teachers for a refund. Um,
Fair. Yeah, I've seen people use software to analyze a vocal after the fact, and it is surprising how often even somebody like Michael Bublé, who clearly a very well trained, talented singer, on his records that he releases, they do seem to apply copious amounts of auto tune, and I think it does kind of make it sound stilted. It's the difference between somebody singing to a very high professional level, but then once you apply auto tune, it becomes inhumanly accurate and really feels stifled,
yeah.
like it's in a suit that's keeping him on the rails. You know, there's no expression if it's just locked dead onto the pitch every time.
Yeah, it might be like technically perfect, but it loses the emotion, it loses the natural timbre of the voice and all the minor vocal vibrations that are happening.
Mm,
So it does sound very artificial. And I would imagine that now that they're like very rapidly, there's going to be the ability to do convincing AI voices in
mm,
music.
mm,
And I wonder if that's not going to initially have some of the same problems where it's sounding very robotic and artificial because to some degree, like you can't put the full complexity of human expression into binary code. And if a computer has to figure out how to make a sound, it can only do it to like technical specifications. It doesn't know how to put emotion into it. It can't make any stylistic or artistic choices as to how to deliver that note. It's just going to be the note. I would imagine though, as we get further on with AI development, that eventually it will become more realistic. But at this point, it doesn't seem to be a whole lot better than autotune, which autotune itself has gotten a lot better since I first
mm.
started singing.
It's much more subtle than it used to be. Yeah, you can really hide it. I've heard though that Gen Z, when they sing, do something weird with their voice that is kind of a copy of autotune. Like they've got so used to hearing autotune, the artifacts of autotune are so ever present in what they're listening to that they literally recreate it with their real vocal cords. So when they're singing live, it
Oh,
sounds
wow.
like it's being auto-tuned. Yeah, which is wild.
That cannot be a good vocal habit. I'm sure that's going to do damage to their voices if they sing like that.
Yeah.
But it is like that's what people have always done. Like they just mimic the
Mm,
sounds that they hear, and they don't
mm,
realize necessarily that maybe it's not good vocal hygiene, and that
mm,
they're going to damage their voice by singing like that. Like all of those like those American Idol shows or all of these like reality singing competition shows and stuff like that. You
mm,
see huge numbers of people who they're coming through the program and maybe they've never had a lesson before in their life, but they just love to sing and they're coming on and they're
mm,
singing some favorite song of theirs. And what they're doing is they're not singing with their own voice. They're copying
mm,
the voice of the artist whose song they're singing, or they're attempting to copy that person's voice.
mm.
And that sounds like what you're describing, where they're attempting to copy autotune because they think, oh, well,
Right.
that's what singing should sound like.
Uh, and even it's possible to auto tune live these days, apparently. So you could
Oh,
go to a
really?
concert and watch people singing in front of you. By the time the sound gets to your ears, it's actually gone through an automatic tuning process, which again is wild, and just feels like a an unnecessary level of artifice to me. Like, why not just let the audience hear the slightly inaccurate sound of their of their whatever celebrity they've gone to watch sing? I'm sure they'd be okay with them being slightly out of tune in in the excitement of the gig, with all the volume and the energy and the ambiance in the room. I don't think anybody's going to complain about somebody being a couple of cents flat here or there or
No,
sharp.
of course not. I mean, if you go to see like a musical performance on stage or something, and they're singing that night after night, their voice is tired. Of course, they're going to, hit a few notes that maybe are just a bit off, or maybe sometimes they're tripping over their timing or something. They're not always perfect, and you as the audience, you don't even know it because the song just keeps continuing, and there's dancing and the costumes and the special effects, and it's just like you just don't see it. But I think the difference is that when you're sitting and you're just listening and you've got your headphones in and all you're doing is listening very closely to the music, well, then you're kind of listening for the mistakes. You're not listening to enjoy it. You then actually have the ability to be like, that wasn't right. Now the whole
Yeah.
song's ruined for me. Like, I don't, because you're a musician too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
So when you're doing your songs and stuff and you're going through like the mixing process and stuff, like, you must listen to your own songs hundreds and hundreds of times, and you're listening with the ear to hear for the mistake because you're
Yeah.
listening to know what you need
Yeah.
to correct. And it's a very different way of listening to music. And it kind of even ruins your
Yeah.
ability to just listen to it as a listener afterwards. Like, I find I have to take a couple years away from a song before I can just listen to it again.
100%. Yeah, you kind of, maybe you get to hear your own song 5 or 6 times over before you go a little bit ear blind to it, right? And then from then on, you're not really having the same experience as anybody else who's listening. I mean, even the first time you listen to it, it's still weird hearing your own voice, right? So you're already having trouble putting yourself in the mindset of the potential audience. But yes, eventually when you're like listening to the song and you're just hyper detail listening to tiny things that nobody else is ever going to notice, it's very easy to lose for the wood for the trees. I feel like that's probably that's the risk of auto-tune, is that it's the voice is one of the things that people are so good at picking up authenticity. When you hear a real person singing, there's I don't know, your brain can kind of construct the entire human body just through the sound that you can hear of the person's voice. And when you start going in and tweaking it and editing it, you get to this weird what's it called, the uncanny valley, right, where you're
An
creating
audio
something
uncanny
unnerving.
valley.
Right, exactly. Because you're thinking the audience wants to hear perfection, but the audience probably actually wants to hear a person. Like, that's why vocals are so popular in music, I would think.
Well, I also think, like, just from the perspective, if I'm thinking of like, well, the times when I've had like really bad days singing where I just can't seem to get the notes right, nothing's sounding good, and part of my mind is like, oh, I should just auto tune this and be done with it. But one thing that one of my favorite teachers had taught me, she had synesthesia, so she had a really strange way of like describing things. So I don't know how much sense this might make, but she spoke of like putting the notes on a golden thread that runs up your spine, almost like it's connecting all the chakras or something. And so we would be doing like our warm-up scales and stuff like that, and often like holding each note for a long time and just really letting it resonate where it's supposed to, like whether it's meant to be in like the chest cavity or the mask or the crown or wherever you're putting the voice at that time, and really letting it resonate and sit on that golden thread. And so I kind of feel like if you've got somebody who's consistently singing out of tune, their notes are not sitting on the thread. There's some kind of disharmony going on in the body, because she was also a yoga teacher and a ballet teacher, so she was really body based. And so she's always like, okay, well, if you're not getting the note right, it's not resonating in the right spot, like what do we need to adjust in the body in order to make this happen? And if you notice, like if you were to go and listen to somebody like a street performer singing, If they're doing
Hmm.
really well, everybody's like, oh, they're just entranced and amazed. They're throwing coins in his guitar case or whatever. But if they're singing out of tune, people get angry. Like they're not just it's not that they just don't like it. They're actually angered by it being
Hmm.
out of tune. And I wonder if because there is a way in which like sound vibrations, there's something non-material that it's carrying, something on some kind of a spiritual or metaphysical level that those vibrations carry, which is the whole basis behind like mantra chanting and stuff like that, right? It's all
Hmm.
about the vibrations.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering if that other person, by singing out of tune, is kind of just putting their disharmony out into the world and making
Hmm.
other people like feel on edge in some kind of way that they're not necessarily consciously picking up on, but they are
Hmm.
still having an emotional reaction to something non-resonant hitting their bodies, their ears.
It's
I don't
really
know. What do you think
interesting.
about that?
Yeah. Well, the thing. So, firstly, I'll say I do find some very deep, mysterious connection between music and the divine, and I definitely, when I hear beautiful music, well, actually, music that communicates a whole range of things. It feels like a bridge to some domain that we don't normally have access to. So I think musicians kind of need to take that seriously. And then another thought I had about the being slightly out of tune. So the reason that it's so beautiful when somebody sings in tune or sings a consonant note is because the sound waves line up with each other, right? You get they reinforce. It's either they're exactly in time with each other, or one of them is a nice multiple of the other. That you can break down all the most beautiful harmonies into these mathematical relationships. And the disharmonic notes are the ones with the craziest ratios, where it takes 102 repetitions before they line up again. If you were to sing a note that was just tiny fractionally out, that's actually like the worst possible form of disharmonic playing. It's like you're literally, your brain is sitting there waiting, irritated until
It's
the
like, is
sound
that
waves
a
line up
diminished
again.
seventh? Is it the octave? Like, which one is
Yeah, what's
it?
going on? So you're literally putting people on edge as their brains try to decode the thing that they're listening to, rather than what good music does, which is the opposite, which is calms the body because everything is beautifully in sequence and in order. And you're playing with, as a musician, I think you're playing with consonance and dissonance. You're saying dissonance is we're away from home, but we will. You sort of make a promise to the audience. We will return. Like there's an arc, a storyline in the melody and in the harmony. If you're just singing out of tune, you are destroying the entire that pattern that was built into the music, where it's supposed to come home and feel comfortable and pure. That gets stolen away from the listener. And it's like if you were to not finish playing a piece, never play the ending, and everybody is left feeling horribly out at sea, right? 'Cause-
Yeah, music, it is supposed to build in a certain way and resolve in a certain way. And
oh,
like your first category on here, like music being the only universal language, and then what you just said about it being like related to these mathematical ratios and everything like that. I mean, you could say, well, math is the universal language that kind of underpins everything. But because, all of those like quadrivium sciences, astronomy, music, geometry, mathematics, they're all just different ways of coming to understand the patterns that are inherent in creation. They're expressions of those things. That's why they can speak to truth. So once you start getting out of tune, you are deviating away from the cosmic pattern. You're deviating away from Dharma. You are stepping away from God in a sense. And I think like on a spiritual level, there's something about that makes people just go like, no, unless they themselves have a very chaotic soul, in which case maybe they like, I don't know, improv jazz or something like that.
Right. Yeah. But I've got a little bit into jazz, and I still think it's a case of understanding the journey between consonance and dissonance. It's just you get more comfortable with more dissonance, but you still have to maintain that thread that connects you back to the root of the harmony. It's like if you get into eating hotter and hotter chili, and you build up your tolerance to a point where you can enjoy something that's hotter, but there's still such a thing as a balance of spices. Even if your spice tolerance is higher, it's not infinitely high. So it's the same way I would say there are spicier forms of music, but you still have to have a skillful chef who can balance it for you. For
right.
your
You need
tastes.
to understand the rules really well in order to break the rules effectively.
Right. Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just destructive. You're ruining music. You're ruining the food. Whatever it is, if you're not skillful enough, then your breaking of the rules is a problem. But if you are very skilled, you can bend the rules almost to their breaking point and still have it turn out really good and like very interesting.
Well, we've gone way over on round one time-wise, but I'm going to give you 14 points, which is extremely high. It's not out of anything, but all I'm saying is 14 is very, very good score. Ethics, history, or metaphysics?
Okay, well, let's try ethics.
Sure. Okay, we've got we should maximize human flourishing. We've got animals deserve the same ethical considerations as humans. And then we've got the concept of intellectual property is flawed.
All of these would be very interesting. Okay, let's go with... Oh, you're giving me choices. I'm not good at making choices. Do I lose points for being indecisive?
No, I'll tell you what. If you're trying to maximize points, you should try to challenge yourself, because I will give more points for the more difficult the argument you're trying to construct. So if that's a tool of a help in picking,
I'm kind of more just trying to think of like, all right, which way would I maybe want to go with each of these? And I'm thinking about them all at once, so I'm not doing a very good job with that, like narrowing down. So
why don't you talk me through the board? We could.
All right. Well, we can talk through the board.
We can get a 60-second take on each of them.
All right, maximizing human flourishing. I could see the pros and cons to either of those. I feel like I could maybe argue for either side of those and come to a balance. Animals, probably wouldn't argue that they deserve the same ethical considerations, but I'd probably argue that maybe they deserve more than people are often willing to give them. Intellectual property, I'm often 50-50 on that, depending on whether or not I want to use somebody's intellectual property or protect my own.
That's very honest. I'd be interested to hear. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on animals versus humans, animal rights. That's something that I don't think any of the other guests I've had have gone into. So that'd be interesting to hear about that.
Okay, well, I generally approach animal rights from the perspective that they are living beings, they are God's creatures, and we as humans, it is our job to be good stewards of the earth and all of the creatures in it. That means we need to treat animals well. We need to give consideration for their health, their well-being, their thriving, work to minimize our impact on them. Like, I don't think we should be causing animals unnecessary suffering. Totally against like factory farming or anything like that. And I don't generally think laws go far enough to protect animals. But that said, I'm certainly not... I don't think that animals should be treated as equivalent to humans. Like, but then it's kind of like, well, where do you draw that line? If a building is burning down and I have a choice between saving a stranger who's a human or
Hmm.
my beloved white cat who's like my best friend and I just love him so much and I can't stop thinking about him. Like I'm going to save
Yeah.
my cat because I have a personal connection to him. The stranger doesn't
Interesting.
mean anything to me, but my cat is like I'm going to feel that loss if I
Hmm.
lose him, right? So that's not even a case of really thinking about like, well, does he deserve to be saved because he's an animal and don't human lives matter more? Well, if you were to take a very objective viewpoint and zoom out, you could say, well, a human a human soul maybe matters more in the
Hmm.
sense that humans, I think, have at least a different kind of soul as animals. I'm not convinced either way as to whether or not animals do or do not have some kind of a soul that
Hmm.
could have some sort of like afterlife union with the divine. I How could I possibly know that? But there are billions of humans in the world, most of whom do absolutely nothing with their lives. Most of them live meaningless lives, no better than animals. From that perspective, I'm like, well, if you're going to live like an animal, your whole life is centered around seek pleasure, avoid pain, maximize comfort. You've got no spiritual life whatsoever. You're just some nihilistic hedonist. Isn't that the majority of people in the world these days? I
Hmm.
mean,
I feel like that might be more true in the West. Somehow I feel like there's actually a higher average level of spirituality in very poor parts of the world, but maybe that's just a romanticization of. I imagine going to the middle of India or the middle of Africa and finding people who are actually less spiritually deluded than somebody
well, they're
living in
often not
relative
spiritual
comfort.
so much as they're like superstitiously religious because
Mm, yeah.
like high level spirituality does require like a certain IQ capacity because you have to have the intelligence to be able to grapple with like higher
Hmm.
abstract concepts. And if you don't have that IQ level, there's simply nothing that you can really do to bring a person up to that level of understanding. And the best you can do is sort of give them like an exoteric religion that helps them live a life that at least mitigates their tendency towards sin or towards deviation away from God in some way. Um,
But there
but to
does
bring
seem to
it,
be something spiritually damaging about comfort. Would you agree that be,
oh,
being
absolutely.
being rich is actually quite dangerous spiritually?
That's something that I've noticed, like living in a poor country, is that while they do not have a lot of material comforts and modern conveniences, they are very, very rich in the things that we have lost: family,
Hmm.
community, God, um, and just a sense of like tangible connection to the cycles of nature. They
Hmm.
don't walk around with you don't see kids walking around with their faces glued to their cell phones and having zero social skills and nobody knows their neighbors or anything like that. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, comfort uh, does seem to have a detrimental effect on people. And so, like, from that
Hmm.
perspective, if all you're going to do is seek comfort, well, how are you different from an animal? Because that's their life. They're looking for food to fill their bellies. They're looking for a safe, warm place to sleep. And they're hoping that they don't get injuries or illnesses that cause them suffering.
Hmm.
They maybe have
How
a little
far?
bit less capacity to make those decisions, but
Yeah. How far down the food chain do you go before you lose empathy? For example, how easy do you find it to squash a bug?
well, living in I lived in Australia for a long time and it kind of started I thought I was desensitized to bugs, but then living in the jungle I'm just kind of like I don't know about these things are huge, they're everywhere. And so I'm kind of waging a holy war against ants. I have no problem doing a total genocide on ants, wasps,
Okay. Yeah.
spiders, scorpions, like what have you. If especially if it's in my house, you're gone. I don't care. I've got my little electric bug zapper and I love to electrocute them. Just get rid of them. This is not a very spiritual position for me to take, however, because like, I should. This is not being a good steward of the earth, right? I'm having a little bit of a crisis here. Because now I'm like, well, Kat, that's probably not being a very good steward of God's creatures. They deserve to live here too. And I'm like, but do I really need 1 trillion ants living under my house? I don't think so. Yeah. We could do with less.
How many insects would be equivalent to one human? It would be quite a lot, I would think.
Like there is a hierarchy in like everything. I believe anyway that everything material is ensouled to some degree. Even like a rock, it has almost no level of like any kind of consciousness or anything, but there is some level of ensoulment to it because it's part of creation. And the more complex the organism, the more that is the case. But even like they've done studies and stuff where it seems like plants seem to respond to emotion of humans that take care of them, or that maybe they can feel pain when they're cut, which seems strange because like they don't have a brain or a nervous system. So I'm not exactly sure what part of them is feeling pain, but there at least seems to be like something about them that does not want to be cut. And so when it comes to like, obviously like larger animals, mammals specifically, the furrier and cuter, the better. But I've seen some pretty big spiders that are like the size of a mouse. And I feel a little bit bad about squashing those. And it's kind of like, I'm like, well, how is this any different than a small spider? Like, what's the difference? And the difference is that I can see its eyes looking up at me. That's the difference. And it's fuzzy.
Right. But if you saw the little spider up close, if you saw it magnified, then does its ethical does it then deserve more care because you can see its eyes? This is a fuzzy way to
that's something
decide the worth of things.
That's something I've thought about. It is, but there's a connection that happens when you look into another creature's eyes. So like there one time there was like I get these like big giant like locust things, and one of them had fallen into the pool, and I took it out of the pool, and they have the cutest little faces. Like they're bugs and they're disgusting, but gotta be a good steward and rescue it from the pool because these ones don't bite or sting. So I'm kind of like, well, if it's a harmless bug, I'm not going to go out of my way to kill it. If it's something that could hurt me or my cats or something like that, then it's got to go. But take it out, and I set it on the side of the pool, and it's like looking up at me with the sweetest little face and just looking right at my eyes, and it lifts its little front like leg thingy thing that it has and almost like gives a little bit of a wave and as if to say thank you. And I'm like, does it know that I just saved its life? Is it actually thanking me? Could that be? And it's kind of like, well, like it did look right at me. There's a connection there. But I also noticed this, like every creature, all living creatures just want to be loved and safe. Even a little locust that falls into the pool. But like I've started this terrible habit of feeding the pigeons. So now I have like a flock of like 40 or 50 pigeons that live on my house, and all like every time I walk out the door, I'm like getting swarmed by pigeons because they're all like coming to see what I might be bringing them. I also get swarmed by cats, also seeing what I'm bringing them. But I've noticed like, because I'm feeding them every day, and some of them are like bold enough that they'll come and eat out of my hand. They also just walk right up to the cats with no fear. And I'm like, well, they all have individual little personalities. Like I can tell who's who. Some of them will respond to my voice. Like they're just pigeons. They're just birds. But they do have some emotional capacity. And they do feel scared. They feel pain. They can feel love. At least they can appear to receive it. Some of them even appear to give it back. For a while, I had the tiniest little baby pigeon that was too soon out of its nest, just a fledgling, which unfortunately we lost. But we called him Little Peep Peep, and he'd just come sit in my hand. Ugliest little thing you've ever seen, because he only had his downy feathers and this big giant beak that was too big for his face. But he would just look at us with just like the most love in his eyes. And I'm like, I don't understand how people can treat animals as if they're nothing, as if they're
Hmm.
just resources or commodities for us to use and exploit, with no consideration for the fact that they do feel suffering and they do feel emotion. So, like,
Yeah.
if I had my preference, I would probably just not eat any animal products at all, because I don't even like the thought of doing it.
There's a YouTube channel that I watched for a while that was looking at microorganisms under the microscope. And it's amazing how if you spend 5 or 10 minutes watching a single-celled organism fighting for its life or trying to escape a predator, you actually feel similar amounts of empathy. That oh, this is a being that has desires and hopes, and it's thriving to survive, and you feel sad if it gets attacked or it just reaches the end of its natural life, and that's just a single-celled organism. And then I think, okay, but if we wanted to make the world the perfect environment to have as many single-celled organisms as possible, that would mean killing a lot of higher organisms. So I don't know how much we have a tendency to anthropomorphize and overextend. When I think about AI, it's a similar thing, that if you create a program that's just going to give you back a text string that says, please don't stop the program, feel sorry for me. There's a sense in which I think as humans, we lack the ability to distinguish real agency from kind of an illusion of consciousness, an illusion of seeing ourselves. Or even you see a face, don't you, in wood grain or in the stars at night. Like we're just constantly
If you've had
hunting
enough
for.
mushrooms, I suppose you do.
Maybe that's my problem. Yeah, I guess I'm just saying that I've yeah, because I definitely I struggle with squashing insects. Actually, I hate to kill an animal, even if it's just a little fly or a bug. Like I look around my room and I'm like, oh, there's a spider spinning a web in the corner of my room. That's lovely. Like the two of us inhabiting this space together. I don't have any interest in squashing the little spider. But I also think at the end of the day, the circle of life requires both birth and death. If an animal is gonna die to produce meat for me to eat, that's probably a more humane death, as it were, than what it would have got in the wild. Like being executed at a butchery is probably a quicker and less painful death than being eaten alive by a predator, in the wilderness. So I think I am prepared to take my part in the great chain of being, as it were, and eat meat confidently, knowing that one day will be my turn to go, and we're all part of that great story of being born, of striving, of loving, and then ultimately of dying at the end.
Yeah, I used it to be more like you when it came to killing bugs. Like I would do it, but I didn't necessarily want to. And I'd get like these big huntsman spiders in my flat in Australia, which
Uh-huh.
look really scary, but are totally harmless and are actually very shy. And I was like, well, you know what? As long as you stay up there where I can see you, you're fine. And if they came down onto the floor, I would like catch them under a glass or something and just take them outside. But when there's the potential that, okay, maybe it is a venomous spider and I don't really know what
Yeah.
this thing is, and
Right.
it kind of doesn't look very friendly, I've had to be a little
Yeah.
bit more strict about that. But I think from the perspective of like, what do we owe animals ethically? I don't think that we necessarily should not ever eat animals. I think there are certain spiritual paths that demand a vegetarian diet. But those are not paths that are meant for everybody. Other paths do demand a meat eating diet. So I'm not here to like ethically judge anybody for their dietary preferences. Everybody, like, you have to do what is healthy for you first and foremost. You cannot, like, some of these ethical vegans, as they call themselves, where their main reason for not eating meat is not some health related reason, but because they want to save the animals. Which is all very noble until you find out that they're letting their own health suffer and deteriorate because they are not eating what their body is asking for. And you know, we all have different bodies and different health needs. If you're going to put the well-being of animals as a broad, vague category above your own personal responsibility to your health, because you too are one of God's creatures and your soul is connected to the divine, like your body is a temple for God. Quite literally, you have an obligation to keep it healthy and in good working condition. And if that means that you need to eat meat or other animal products, then that's what you'll have to do. But you should, you know, take an ethical approach and try to minimize the suffering. Like, I would say, like, I don't generally go out of my way to eat meat just because I feel like I want the taste of it or something like that. But if I feel like, okay, I really need like the protein or the vitamins or whatever else that is in this, like there's a reason I might be craving like a red meat or something, maybe I'm low on iron, well, then maybe I should consider having that, and the minimum amount that I need without, and preferably from somebody who's ethically raised and slaughtered it and not like some factory farmed poor thing.
Yeah. Great. Well, let's move along. I've given you 13 for that, which is still a very, very excellent score. Cinema and theatre, world affairs, or epistemology?
Well, I definitely won't do well on world affairs because I generally try to minimize my intake of that kind of content these days.
Smart.
I haven't seen much in the way of movies in a long time. So I think that's going to leave us with epistemology.
Yeah. Okay. Science is the only path to knowledge. Reality is subjective. Or our fallible memory is a fundamental epistemic limit.
These are all really interesting. Can you just say a little bit about what you mean by that last one?
Yeah, so I think this is connected to... I was thinking about the fact that we're very pleased with ourselves for some of the philosophical or mathematical conclusions that we've drawn. We think we can build things up from first principles, and we've come to all kinds of great conclusions that are not based on observation in the slightest. They're just purely they're just from our own brains, and therefore the conclusions are so solid. However, the thing I was thinking through is that we only think that we've reasoned through successfully because we have a memory of checking every step. Like if it's a mathematical proof, we think, oh, I spent the last 3 hours going through one stage at a time and making sure that this is a rock solid mathematical proof. However, our memory is fallible, and therefore, no matter how solid the actual mathematical steps are, we still have to rely on our memory. So there's always this blocker in between us and the world of kind of perfect mathematical conclusions, because we as beings have to exist in time, and our only thread through time is our memory, which is a fundamentally fallible instrument.
Okay.
So I think that's what that was connected to.
When you say reality is subjective, are you referring to physical reality, or?
Yeah, I will say you can. I'll say you can define these phrases however you like, really, if you have a more interesting direction to go in. But yeah, I think reality is subjective would imply that there is nothing objective, right? The opposite of the statement would be to say that there's something that's true, regardless of if anybody sees it or believes it.
Okay, we could riff off of that maybe.
Yeah.
What kind of immediately comes to mind for me with that is one of the earlier Star Trek Next Generation episodes. Are you familiar with that show? Are you a Trekkie?
I know about Star Trek, but I haven't watched it in great detail. Tell me about this episode.
All right, permit me to nerd out. This is one of
Sure.
the early first season episodes, and the Enterprise encounters this alien who just calls himself the Traveler. And he is able to, by accident, he has like some kind of seizure type of thing, and by accident he makes their ship travel really, really far in a very short amount of time. And eventually he has one of these incidents that takes them basically to what you would think is like the edge of the universe, essentially. And they are in a place where thought, matter, time, like it's all one and the same. And the crew is, every thought they have is suddenly manifesting as reality. Like they might just have a fleeting thought that, oh, what if the turbo lift caught on fire? And suddenly they're engulfed in flames in the turbo lift. And they can't control their thoughts. They have no ability to, they don't have the mental discipline to control their thoughts. So everything they think manifests as reality. And the Traveler says, oh, no, this is terrible. Your species was not meant to be here for a very, very long time. You're not ready for this. And, you know, he seems to have an ability to exist in that realm where time and space and matter are all non-different. And there's just, it's a version of reality, right? But it's definitely not like physical reality as such. However, it does lead to some interesting questions as to what degree could we actually change physical reality if we had such mental control that we could be basically like what he was, where we have the ability to control our thoughts such that we can take ourselves outside of time or outside of matter or manipulate those things. And so that is not something that I think would really be possible if there was not the existence of some kind of metaphysical reality. Because in order to get into that place, you actually do need to step outside the limits of time and space, which is they're the two things that like the intersection of time and space defines material reality. You have to be able to get outside of that in order to be able to like work with it as if you're the sculptor. And this is something, you know, that if you were to get like, you know, I don't know, maybe the Buddha could do something like that. Like when he reached his peak enlightenment, when he went fully beyond all conditioned existence, that's kind of where I imagine that he would have been. Like he went down to like the quantum level and counted like all the quantum cycles and everything like that. And just, we didn't really count them. He just knew. And then you've got like, in the Vedic tradition, they talk about siddhis, siddhis, which are things like walking on water. Like a lot of the miracles that Jesus performed would count as like siddhis, things like this that are said to be powers that you acquire when you are sufficiently spiritually enlightened. You will not acquire these powers if you are gaining enlightenment in order to get those powers. That will become a hindrance to you. You will not be able to get very far if you still have that ego desire in you. But those who are sufficiently spiritually advanced in that matter are said to have like these sort of miraculous abilities. And it does kind of lead to some questions as to how solid this reality is. You know, we're said to be living in illusion. We're under the veil of the moon, and this reality isn't the real reality. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I was pondering on whether, in fact, God experiences reality in the way that you're describing, as in, you're kind of saying, oh, if you become sufficiently spiritually enlightened, then you can almost form reality with your mind, like in the Star Trek episode. And it feels odd to say that God might be constrained by anything. Like, is God constrained by logic? Is God constrained by moral imperatives that exist outside of himself? So, but then on the other hand, I kind of wonder whether there is a deep substrate of truth that even God must conform with. It's almost that once you become sufficiently spiritually enlightened, you see the true manifold that we live on, and therefore you can navigate it perfectly. It's like enlightenment is not believing falsehoods, but is knowing where the dangers lie, so that you don't need to worry about them. And I probably would say it more that way round, that there's great power available, but not infinite power available for the kind of spiritually enlightened. And that the power comes from knowing more rather than being able to change reality. It's like there is a big T truth out there, I think.
I think to some extent, like, go
modified, on. Yeah. Well, and in particular that different people around the world who learn about truth will always come to the same conclusions. They'll always discover the same underlying reality, rather than there being these fundamentally non-congruent realities. And so sufficiently enlightened people ought to agree with each other, I guess, would be my assumption.
Yeah, my feeling on this is that there is a way in which God is non-different from truth itself. He is the law of the universe. And to that extent, I want to say, I may be misremembering this, so perhaps you'll have somebody in the comments who can correct me if I am, but Saint Faustina had these visions of hell. And, you know, she has written like her diaries and stuff about it. It's been a long time since I familiarized myself with it, but if I remember correctly, you know, she had the opportunity to ask God, like, well, why don't you do anything for these people suffering in hell? And his answer was essentially that his justice has to be greater than his mercy. As much as he might want to, it's almost like there are some laws that even God cannot break, because to do so would render him not God anymore. So it's kind of interesting to think about something like that, and the degree to which maybe we are able to construct our own reality, and what the limits on that might be. As you say, like, even the most spiritually enlightened person is probably not able to completely defy all the laws.
You just know what your best path is from all of the possibilities that exist, and you don't have the ability to create logical contradictions. So, like, God takes no joy in the death of the wicked, and yet wicked people do, as you say, need to be punished, and God can't do a logical contradiction where somebody is both dead and alive at the same time. So, yeah, I think I do believe in reality being objective fundamentally, that an observer can discover truth but cannot create truth.
Yes, I think there is an objective truth that underpins all of reality, and that is the objective reality. And obviously, like within physical reality, there are things that we can know to be objectively true in terms of like scientific empiricism. Like, I can prove that I'm in a house. I can prove that the sun is shining. I can, like, these are all things that I can show to someone else, and we can all see the same thing and come to an agreement. But just because we're all seeing the same thing doesn't mean we're not all seeing the same illusion either.
Great. All right. Let's. Should we wrap that round up?
Sure.
I'm going to give you 12 for that, and move us on to round 4. So we're halfway through. I'm afraid we're going a bit slower than expected,
That's
but
okay.
we're having some deep discussions. So there you go. Psychology, elite theory, or theology?
Let's go with psychology.
All right. Eyewitness testimony should not be permissible in court. Social media is psychologically harmful, or mental health issues must be destigmatized.
Interesting selection. Let's go with the last one, I guess.
Sure.
I'm curious how you've come up with some of these.
Well, to be honest, I jammed them out quickly. A lot of really
interesting categories. Okay.
It was very much I need to get this job done of prepping for Labster this year. Let me sit down and just spam out loads and loads of interest. It's basically all my go-to discussions. If I'm at a pub and there's a lull in conversation, it's probably one of these things is what I would bring up.
So you're prepared. You've had a lot of pub practice.
I've had years of
All right, mental health issues must be destigmatized. I'm kind of in two minds about this because on the one hand, I don't like that there are still people who kind of feel like, oh no, I'm having some mental health issue. I can't talk about it. I have to go it alone. I'm not going to seek out therapy or any kind of help. And they end up on some kind of self-destructive spiral that's ultimately very harmful for them and causes them a lot of suffering. But at the same time, I really hate the modern push to actively destigmatize it, which is to say that the push to normalize it. Like all these bumper stickers, like it's okay to not be okay. The sentiment that they're aiming at is it's okay to talk about the fact that you're not okay and to seek help. That's really what their intention is. But when they phrase it like that, it's okay to not be okay. And you see that everywhere. It becomes a little mantra in your brain and it programs your brain. And the programming that I think it has is that it is acceptable for you to be in this state of mental disease. That is ultimately what you're programming your mind to believe, because that's really what the words mean. If they wanted to say it's okay to seek help, that would be different. They say it's okay to be dysfunctional. Why is that? Why would that be acceptable to anybody? If you feel like crap all the time, if you're in deep depression, is that acceptable to you? Are you okay with just being in that state and just being like, yeah, I'm just going to be depressed the rest of my life. I'm okay with that. No, you're not. Yeah. Nobody's okay with that. I don't think we need to put anybody down for that. We should help these people, but we should not normalize it, because the normalization has the effect of people just adopting that as their identity. I remember a friend of mine, she's got a teenage daughter, and she basically says her daughter wants to be on pills because all of her friends are on pills, and having their mental health diagnoses is like their identity. And the more of these little labels that you can stick on yourself, the more like cred you have at school, I guess. So she's like constantly asking for things like antidepressants or benzos or what Adderall, whatever her friends are on, basically. And it's like, well, that's a direct result of the push to normalize these things. And the normalization of mental health issues has just resulted in a lot of people being on big pharma drugs. So while the road to good intentions, right? Leads where such roads always lead. And that's essentially what's happened with that whole destigmatization push, is that they didn't destigmatize it at all. They just tried to normalize it, and in the process made actual normal people like recoil. Like, why are you intentionally adopting like like cluster B personality disorders as your identity, essentially. And that's what you see a lot of young people doing. They're all talking about, oh, my trauma, my triggers. Like, it's like, if you have a mental health issue, well, get help and work on that. But do you need to go around and build that up into an identity? Because once you do that, you've created a crutch for yourself, and now it's actually harder for you to get better, because now your ego is identified with, I'm sick, there's something wrong with me. Or my favorite, I have a chemical imbalance in my brain. Do ya? Did you get a spinal tap and have that tested? No, you didn't. Which chemical is out of balance? They can't answer that. But it's they act like they are sick with something like cancer or diabetes or something that can't be cured, and they're just like, well, I just need a lot of special accommodations now because I am sick. And it becomes an excuse not to get better. And I don't think that's healthy.
Do you think health is the right framing for these problems? I think it's Matt Walsh has been pushing back against this recently, that we have language that talks about something going on in your psychology as if it was a disease or some sort of physical injury, and actually we make the problem more difficult to understand by making a false equivalence. What do you think about that?
I think that we could talk about it in terms of functionality and dysfunctionality. Ultimately, most mental health issues are kind of coping mechanisms. Your life is crappy in a very specific kind of way, and so you develop this very specific kind of coping mechanism that allows you to exist within that kind of reality without going completely insane. And then it becomes a problem once they are then removed from that situation, and that coping mechanism they developed doesn't work in the rest of their life, and it starts then causing problems. But I don't like Matt Walsh's takes on these things. Like, it was maybe not that long ago, actually, that he was saying like, oh, like there's no such thing as depression, it's just being sad, or something to that effect. Yeah. And his comments were filled with people who all have actually experienced depression saying, no, it's like way beyond sadness. It's not sadness. And it's not. There is a very distinct difference between feeling sad and being like really clinically depressed. At the stage of clinical depression, you actually don't feel anything. You're completely numb. You just have this heaviness. You feel like you're sort of underwater. You can't do anything. And so it's very unhelpful to just be like, oh, just go to the gym and eat better. We're dealing with people who are so depressed that their brain connections are not working properly, such that they cannot do tasks that require planning. So even something simple like, I want to make myself some pasta. What do I need to do? Okay, I need to get the pot out of the cupboard. I need to fill it with water. I need to put it on the stove. I need to turn on the stove. I need to wait till it boils. Then I need to put in the pasta. Then I've got to set the timer. Then I've got to strain it. All those step-by-step things that if you're a healthy person, you just do it automatically without even thinking. For the person who's been in a deep clinical depression, they are not actually cognitively capable of doing that. And so there is a difference there between having like a chronic sadness and having something actually dysfunctional going on. And oftentimes it's circumstantial. There's some circumstance in the person's life that is causing them to feel, like in the case of deep depression, causing them to feel hopeless, causing them to feel that they have no agency to change their situation. And it starts off as sadness. In the hierarchy of emotions, sadness is at the bottom because it doesn't motivate you at all. You just kind of collapse. Anger would be a step up. Like if you were kidnapped and being held hostage and you just felt sad about the situation, you're unlikely to fight back or try to save yourself. But if you can get yourself to feel really angry about it, then you'll try to save yourself. Then you'll fight back. You'll try to escape. So people who are dealing with depression don't have that ability anymore to get angry, and they no longer even have the ability to feel sad. Like they're so far beyond that it's like, well, clearly they need some kind of help. Clearly this is not just an issue of emotional management. There's something bigger going on here. And for those kind of people, I think, well, when it comes to like the destigmatization, talking that it's okay to not be okay, it is okay for those people to come and talk about that and to seek help, and they shouldn't be put down for it or have their concerns or feelings dismissed in the way that the Matt Walshes of the world do. And I think it's a big problem on the right. The way that the right talks about mental health issues is just woefully uninformed about the reality of it, and it's very dismissive. It's like, well, I don't want to learn about this issue and actually come up with solutions that would be useful and helpful for people. I just want to get on my high horse and be smug and self-righteous and just judge other people. Well, that's not the right path either. In my opinion. You might disagree.
No, I think that's very helpful. Very much more nuanced take than we usually get. So I'm going to give you 13 for this round. And we're going to do round 5. Technology, natural sciences, or Christology? Christology being the study of Jesus Christ, by the way.
Not being a Christian, that might not be the most appropriate one for me. Although
No,
it could be
I thought
interesting.
that might be a warning, but you're welcome to pick whichever one you like.
You know what? Let's go for a challenge. Let's go for Christology.
All right, here we go.
I was raised Catholic, after all. I'll do my best.
See how much you can remember. Jesus was emotional. Jesus was born of a virgin. Or Jesus is fully God and fully man. And you can choose whether to answer this based on your current views or a sort of remembered Catholic answer. Or however you like to answer it, really.
Okay. Well, I could go with Jesus was born of a virgin, because I actually might have something that could be of interest on that to people regardless of their faith in terms of the traditional symbolism of the Virgin.
Great,
and
yeah.
I know for Christians, the authenticity of the historical story is very important to Christian belief. So I'm not necessarily arguing for or against that. But to take a symbolic view of this exclusively, virgin used to have a very different meaning to what it has now. Now it means a woman who's never had sex. And it did also used to mean that, but more importantly, it meant a woman who was unmarried or unpossessed in some way. It didn't necessarily mean that she had never had sex, but it referred to a quality of possession of her. So the Virgin is the inaccessible woman. She appears over and over in mythology in various different forms. You have a lot of like virgin goddesses, for example, who, despite being virgins, still seem to have an awful lot of lovers. or they somehow reclaim their virginity, like by bathing in the waters again. Like, this is all very symbolic. They're clearly not talking about physical intactness. They're talking about a quality of soul. And so from that perspective, the nature of the feminine is that it is fluid, it is abyssal, it is chaotic, it has very dark, destructive elements, something I refer to as like the Durga quality of the feminine. That really, it's what holds the fascination for men, but it's also what makes her very dangerous to men. And it is this which modesty seeks to cover up in various forms. And so modesty is really more of an inner quality than anything that you are wearing, for example. It's a manner of being. So for Mary to be a virgin, what that means is that she remains inaccessible. Regardless of how Jesus was conceived, that feminine quality of hers was not possessed by the masculine quality. She remains fluid rather than solidified by contact with the masculine. So there's a certain plasticity to the feminine that is looking for the masculine to give it a permanent form. And to have one's virginity taken is to be given a permanent form by a man such that no other man could ever come and change that. You then belong to him in a spiritual sense. So for this reason, you could say there's a lot of symbolic value to Jesus being born of a virgin. And there are other virgin goddesses in mythology who also give birth to special children in some way, shape, or form. And that quality of being a virgin is really essential for the god to take birth. From like the perspective of like sex magic, mothers are not appropriate for that work. A woman who has ever been pregnant is generally not a candidate to be used as a vessel for that Durga quality anymore. She's no longer a virgin, not because she had sex, but because she had a baby. And because she had a baby, she's been impregnated quite literally by the masculine. She has been given a certain form by the masculine, which obviously takes its birth as a child. But that can occur on a much more spiritual and symbolic level as well. So for Jesus to be born of a virgin, well, I would say if he's going to be God, it's kind of necessary for his story to be born of a virgin, at least symbolically.
What's that term Durga, the Durga quality? Where does that come from?
So in Hindu mythology, Durga is she's an emanation of Kali, and she basically becomes enraged on the battlefield. She just starts like slaying demons left and right, and she's just got like this blood fury. She's totally out of control. And this is like the full abyssal force just unleashed. It's pure destruction is all it is. She doesn't just stop at slaying the demons. She just keeps killing and killing and killing until Lord Shiva, her husband, lies himself down on the ground in front of her, and she steps on him. You'll see this as famous iconography of Kali with her skulls draped around her, all the demons that she's slain, and she's got her foot on Lord Shiva. And many people in the West misinterpret this as like the dominance of the feminine over the masculine. That's not it at all. It's Shiva's stillness and her love for him that stops her dance of destruction.
Wow. And is there a virgin connection with Shiva there, or are you just referring to this dangerous feminine?
Just that quality. Dangerous feminine quality, the really dark quality of the feminine. It's the place where like cruelty is born from. The degree to which somebody is cruel is the degree to which they are feminine, for example. But it's also where all of the magic and the mystery, and it's essentially the container of the raw material for the heroic man if he wants to go through like that whole alchemical union of masculine and feminine within himself. Perhaps he chooses to use a real woman as an evocation of his divine feminine, and do it like that. But essentially, she is a representative of pure power, but power that is just destructive. It's like sheet lightning going all over the place. And the man comes in like Shiva, he's a lightning pole, and he takes that energy, draws it out, and directs it into a constructive form. And the next thing you know, we have, in my case, a flickering light bulb above me. Not the most perfect electricity, but there we go. Shiva could have done a little bit better directing that electricity, but we won't complain. The power's working, so all good there.
Yeah. So
not so much.
No, well, indeed. So from a Christian perspective, the significance of the virgin birth is that all other humans having a human father are therefore born with original sin. And because Jesus was born without a human father, and the fatherhood is therefore divine, he's able to sort of break the cycle and bring a union between divinity and the human. Do we see that same theme in other virgin birth accounts from other religious traditions, that the person who is born of a virgin is therefore able to break out of a cycle or have a divine essence in a way that's not possible from somebody who has two human parents.
There might be, but it's not a theme that I've seen so often that I can immediately think of an example, or that I could say definitively that, yes, that is a consistent pattern. Christianity's the most prominent example I could think of with that. However, Christianity there's a lot of, I don't want to say obsession, it's maybe too strong of a word, but sort of preoccupation with purity among Christians that is often tends a little bit too much towards material interpretations of that. So the idea of, like, you see this in like some of the more fundamentalist Christian cultures where they've got like that whole like purity subculture going on, where fathers give their daughters purity rings and take them to dances or something.
I think
like
that's
that,
quite an American
thing. A
thing.
little creepy to me. Yeah, and so there's this big focus on sexual purity specifically, and specifically around the concept of virginity as being the key indicator of purity, which is interesting because early Christianity, like the Romans complained a lot that the Christians like wouldn't bathe, that they were very dirty and smelly, because the Romans had a big bathing culture. And the Christians, their view was like, no, only the purity of the soul matters. We're just going to swear off everything of the body. And so it's interesting that it's kind of come in the modern age to be a fixation on a purity that is very much of the body. You know what I mean? Sorry, were you about to say something?
Well, I was just thinking about whether the Roman perception of Christians, because there was a Gnostic branch of Christianity that did have that teaching that you're describing about that the body is unclean and the world is unclean, and we can be pure once we shrug it off. We kind of need to ascend into a spiritual plane. That's the true destiny of the Christian, whereas the rest of the Christian orthodoxy, in opposition to the Gnostics, were very much of the view that actually no, the physical world does matter, and we can live righteously in the world. So I wondered whether the let's not bathe because who cares about the body was the Roman perception of Christians because of Gnostics, rather than the group who became mainstream Christianity.
Yeah, I don't know if that would have been like something that later broke off into a Gnostic sect or what. Like this would have been like the really early days of Christianity, like the first couple hundred years or something. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting that the focus has gone in that direction, given its
especially in America, which has its own kind of quirks. Great. Well, should we bring that round to an end? I think I will give you... it's a tricky one to score this. I'll tell you what, I'll give you a 12. And that brings us to our final round. Literature, software and mathematics, or eschatology?
Is this like, what kind of literature are we talking?
Well, none of the questions are going to be about... are going to name a specific piece of literature and ask you a question about it. It's broader questions like the difference between high and low literature is arbitrary, or the literary canon is overrated, I think are a couple of the literature questions. Okay.
Well, software and math is definitely not my strong suit, so probably wouldn't be able to do those very well. Okay, let's go with eschatology.
Okay.
That should be interesting. Regardless of what you have in there, it's probably going to be interesting.
Yeah, so here's your three assertions within eschatology. The new creation will be an entirely different realm. God interacts with humanity differently at different periods. Or the Antichrist is a specific individual?
Let's go with the first one. The new creation will be in an entirely different realm.
Sure.
Is that your position, by the way?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably no. I think the direction Scripture points me is that it's a renewal of the current realm that we live in. It's rather than destroy everything, start again somewhere else. It's actually a fix what we already have.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So would you consider, well, I'll just tell you what I think, I guess, and you can tell me if you consider this to be a different realm by your definition or not. So
Sure. Yeah.
within sort of a more traditionalist framework, there is obviously like the idea of like the cyclical ages, the golden age, the silver age, the bronze age, the iron age, and all the way, and then it starts again, right? So one of the things that I get asked about a lot in regards to Atlantis is like, where was it? And so I will circle back to the topic at hand, but let me just set this up. So when people ask me that, because everybody's always going around and like looking for evidence of where it was. Oh, it's in the Sahara, it's in the Bahamas, it's in like wherever. Like there's a million different locations, Doggerland, what have you. And they're like tinkers going around looking for little treasures to collect to add to their box of evidence so that they can say that Atlantis was definitely here and try to pinpoint it to like some chronological time period and geographic location. And I'm like, well, first of all, probably a colonial power, so probably looking at a lot of different areas, but Atlantis was not part of this age. It is not part of the Kali Yuga. It is the age prior. Well, there are actually two Atlantises, but the one most recently prior, the one that everybody's probably looking for anyway, that is behind like this time barrier. We cannot penetrate past that with empirical science or any other means. And the reason for that, I believe, is that as we descend deeper into the Kali Yuga, there's a process of solidification that occurs. Renee Guénon talks extensively about this. And so as this process of solidification is undergoing, well, at the fall of Atlantis, that ushers in the Kali Yuga, depending on whether or not you think that that was the trigger point for the Kali Yuga. Obviously, some debate about that, but things have to descend. And that which is solid descends into this realm, and that which is not solid, or at least not as solid, remains inaccessible to us. We are too solid to access that realm now. What remains? Well, like giant things like Stonehenge that we can't explain, or other like archaeological sites that have just like ridiculously huge stones or something that we cannot possibly explain how ancient people with the technology that we think they had could have done this. And I think it's possible that, well, out of everything that could have fallen, allegorically speaking, stone, of course, is symbolically the heaviest. It would make sense that that would be all that's left. It's also the thing that erodes the least. But given that there seems to be different planes of reality, and that the denser you are, the lower you sit on those planes, if we were to have a new creation that was going to be a new golden age, which is what I assume you mean by a new creation, then I would think that that would be on a plane far above our solid plane, such that, it might be, maybe it is like here on Earth, but it's on such a different wavelength that we don't perceive it. Like for all we know, like on some different wavelength, Venus is not some hot, dry planet, but a beautiful paradise. But our perception in this subjective, illusory reality does not allow us to see these other realms and does not allow us to exist there. I've even heard it said in some occult circles that, the reason that it's incumbent upon us to contact the gods is because we need to bring ourselves up to their level, because they cannot solidify so much that they can come down to ours. So I think it would probably be in a different realm, in the sense of it not being something perceptible to us in this solid state.
There's let me read you from the last chapter of Revelation, the last book of the Bible. It says, "I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more." I think sea there symbolically meaning the realm of chaos and destruction and terror. So there's no more of that, like the place that was terrifying to them, that caused destruction and where monsters came out of, doesn't exist. And I saw a holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. And that's what pricked my ears up when you were talking about things descending down, because there's this image of the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And the one seated on the throne said, "Behold, I make all things new. It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give freely from the spring of the water of life. To the one who overcomes will inherit all things." So there's this symbolically the place that the people of God will dwell comes down to them from a heavenly realm, rather than everybody ascending upwards and living the rest of eternity in heaven. There's kind of a taking something that is heavenly and therefore out of our reach and bringing it down, which again is interesting as a flip side to, you must know the Tower of Babel, right, where the plan was that the people were going to build upwards and reach heaven, and they thought that they could reach to God that way. And this is kind of the opposite of that picture, because this is God building the structure and sending it downwards. And so there's kind of a making something accessible that we would not be able to attain for ourselves. So I thought that that was interesting, reflecting with what you were just talking about.
Well, it's interesting to consider with the comparison you make to the Tower of Babel, because the Tower of Babel seems to have been an initiatic ziggurat, which was fairly common in the ancient world. And these towers were they usually had about 7 levels. They were meant to be ascended by the initiates. And so the climbing of the tower was an ascent towards God, not in the literal sense of we're literally going to build a tower up into the sky until we reach heaven, because on its face, that's kind of silly. And I think even the ancients would have found that a silly concept. But it's you ascend the tower, and through the initiation, you come to know God. So I'm curious if you were to take that view of, say, the Tower of Babel, and then contrast it with the like the temple coming down from the heavens as the bride, which is interestingly in many languages, especially Eastern languages, the word for bride is the same as the word for power in the sense of that Durga quality.
There's clearly a really deep and seemingly cross-cultural connection between up being towards God and goodness, and down being towards hell and the underworld and punishment and death. People ascend mountains and they have their spiritual revelation up high where you can see things apart from anything else. So yeah, I think that's an interesting idea, that the Tower of Babel was, much like a lot of other structures in the ancient world, the place where God would meet with people, as in not only God, but other gods as well, right? You go up to the top of your ziggurat, and that's the place of the meeting point between heaven and earth, where we, like the humans,
right? Because the only people allowed in the top level were the only people allowed at the top level were the fully initiated ones, the ones who actually had the ability to do ritual magic, essentially.
Yeah. In the particular case of the Tower of Babel, in the narrative, it's clear that building this temple displeased God, and he deliberately wrecked the plans. It was everyone was working together, and God deliberately gave them lots of different languages and scattered them across the face of the earth. So there's kind of there's an interesting theme there of the people are not able to collaborate with one another on this project without God's permission. Whereas in the Revelation, you see people from every tribe, tongue, and nation worshipping God together. So I do think there's an explicit contrast being made between the two. And I guess one of them is, let me see. It says, "Come, let us build this thing, and we will reach heaven." Sorry, you were going to say something while I look up the actual text.
I can say something while you
Thank you.
Look that up. So, from the perspective of God striking the tower down and scattering the people, there is a whole category of myths associated with failed attempts to reach the divine, in terms of like that sort of heroic, almost Promethean impulse. And that there are two categories of that myth. One is in which the hero is successful and becomes, he becomes the hero as a result of his deed. He's immortalized as a hero or a demigod or whatever. And the other category of myths are the ones where the would-be hero fails, and because he fails, he has displeased the gods. He's invoked their wrath. If you are going to embark on that path, the heroic path, what Evola calls the Olympian solar path, you really need to be sure that you're going to succeed, because to fail on that path traditionally means that not only did you fail on that path, but you actually disqualify yourself from any other path. You cannot take a path that is one of challenging the gods and still be allowed to like back out and be like, oh no, I actually just want to go to church now. I changed my mind. I'm just going to go pray in church now. It's like, no, sorry, it doesn't work like that. I'm not super familiar with the Babel myth, but I'm leaning towards maybe putting it into that category of cautionary tales.
Yeah, well, I found the text. So it says that as the people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to themselves, "Come, let us make ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we'll be scattered over the face of the whole earth." Which, to me, sounds like it's explicitly in contrast with God's instruction to mankind to fill the earth and subdue it. So they've been told to spread out and go everywhere, and instead they're going to just stay in one spot and make a name for ourselves. We want to be important, but we don't want to follow the instruction to go and fill the earth. And then they make this tower, and the Lord came down to see the city and the tower they were building. The Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there over the earth, and they stopped building the city. That's why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. So it's kind of an explicit, it's almost an anti-globalist story. This is, we need the humans to not be a single totalizing city. We want them spread out. And really interesting comment, if the people are speaking the same language, nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Like, really interesting comment from God there, that if they could do this tower, then they could do anything. And we can't have that.
It's kind of similar to like the myth of the hermaphrodite, where man and woman were split into two different sexes because combined they were so powerful that they challenged the gods. And so we had to be split apart. And basically every every path back that is one of these Olympian paths requires the union of the masculine and feminine in some fashion or another, either literal or symbolic. It's always a feature of that. So it's really interesting, and I wonder if this Tower of Babel story has maybe some kind of a parallel to that. But my understanding is that story is like, there's not a lot of like other references to that in the Bible, and there's not really any historic evidence to
it's very early
context on it. Yeah,
this is before Abraham even pops up into the story. So this is pre, this is a story from before the nation of Israel was, the person from whom they all descended doesn't even exist yet. So
okay,
this is kind of
interesting.
This is a very,
it's definitely
very early.
One of the more fascinating stories of the Bible. Like it's such a small little footnote in it almost, but it's there's something about it that really captures the imagination.
Yeah, it's only a couple of generations after the story of the flood. So this is kind of like one of the earliest things that humanity got up to. And according to the text, if they had not been interrupted, then they would have been able to do anything. Which is kind of I just find that a fascinating comment of, okay, so why has humanity not been able to do X, Y, Z? Well, perhaps it's because they're literally being prevented, steered from heaven, away from their intended. It's kind of maybe it's comforting if you think about the potential dystopia that is easy to worry about. That wouldn't it be terrible if humanity did X, Y, Z? And the answer is, yeah, humanity could do awful things, but fortunately their power is limited because there's almost a watchtower in making sure that they don't get too big for their britches. Where did we start? Oh, new creation. Oh yes,
we got a little off tangent.
It's like, how did we get here?
Hopefully it won't affect my score.
No, that was my fault. But yes, I was arguing that Babel is
my fault too.
the imagery in Revelation is a deliberate mirror or flip of this very early story. It's saying, here's mankind building this great tower that reaches to heaven, and it gets destroyed and broken up. And then in the picture of the new creation, here is God creating the tower that bridges to heaven, and he's now letting people achieve that full objective. Because I think there's a really interesting thing that, I don't know about you, but when I think about modernity and cities and engineering and cars and all versus the idea of primeval man running through nature, I have a tendency to wish for a more primitive existence. You know what I mean? That the things that we have done as a species and created and built together are sort of ugly, and I would dream, if I was picturing a utopian future or a heaven or a new creation, that it would be much more like primitive mankind at one with nature in a simple way. That's not the picture, though, that the Bible paints. The Bible paints a picture more like a city as the final destination, but a kind of perfected city. So I think that's to me a helpful steer, that when I look at the work that mankind does, it's really easy, especially as somebody with slightly, traditionalist leanings, someone with, a conservative bent. It's easy to just look at mankind as a blight on the planet. But I actually think what we should desire is mankind's ingenuity in beautiful harmony with nature. Like, you can go to parts of the world where the architecture is so beautiful and integrated into the landscape that it actually does improve the landscape. And that's not the case for most cities, which are horrible,
Yeah.
eyesores. But there are, go to bits of France, go to bits of Italy, where they've got incredibly beautiful cities that just seem to grow out of the ground. And you think, okay, maybe there is a bright potential eternity where it is mankind taking on that role as the gardener, to take the wilderness and to form it and make it even more beautiful,
Yeah, there's something about it that is the imposition of order onto chaos.
Right. And that we don't have to think of order as like a horrible concrete structure, as opposed to chaos being a wonderful wild rose. You can think of order as being a beautifully cultivated garden. Or to go back to round one when we were talking about animals, that actually we don't have the choice between a horse running free in the wild or being horribly oppressed by mankind. You actually have the possibility of curating a wildlife park where the animals actually live better lives with the care of humanity, rather than the oppression of humanity or the obliteration of humanity.
Right.
Good. Well, that probably is a nice place to finish.
That was very circular, but
well, it's nice.
No,
it's nice
good.
when you
That's
can link
good.
round 1 through to round 5. And I'm going to give you 13 points for that last round. And let me refresh the high score table, and we'll find out how you've done. Look at that! You're at the top of the high score table. You won. You are leading the pack.
Then I don't have to get all like nasty and competitive. Then this is good.
Well, just
Did you
for the
do
sake
that
of the
because
other
I
competitors.
said at the beginning that I don't like myself when I get competitive? Did you do that to like
people won't
keep the beast quiet?
Just for the safety of all my other poor competitors.
You don't want my Durga to come out, right?
No, I'm terrified. No, people won't believe me, but I don't know what the score. I've had loads of people. Look at this. You're
cool.
miles ahead of
I'm looking forward to
Dutton,
watching
Apostolic
these.
Majesty, John D. Yeah, it's been super fun, and it's really interesting. I'll tell you what.
Semi-agog.
You could go and brag to him. He'll enjoy that. So yeah, one of the fun things about doing this has been seeing people talking about topics that they don't normally talk about, and B, thinking off the top of their head. It's really fascinating to see how people behave when they haven't had an opportunity to prepare, to think things through in advance.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been super fun. And thank you so much for joining me.
Excellent idea. Something different. It's been my absolute pleasure. It was great fun. Thank you.
And congratulations.